And I wanted to break down those a little bit for you today. There's a new phrase that people have been referring to because of something that was found in the Strzok page text messages way deep in there. It's interesting because this phrase was redacted on an early page of the text messages, but later on, if you had kept reading all the way through some of those 500 pages, and thank so much to the great researchers and threaders out there, the internet sleuths as they're called. I believe this one was War Economy. That's where the credit goes on this, and Nick Falco, that at one point, all the way back in December of 2015, there's a text message that says, "Did you get all of our OCONUS lures approved?" What does that mean? What are OCONUS lures? What is OCONUS? What does that mean? And how does all of this work? Well, fortunately, this is my former world. This is the world I came from. This is the type of operations that I was very familiar with. So happy to be able to break down that stuff for you and explain some of this technical, it sounds like technical jargon in a sense, or it may sound like that, but what it really is, folks, this is the details. And as we all know, the devil is in the details. When you go through these little details, to me, this all seems quite obvious, but to others that haven't worked in the industry or don't have experience in the field, it might seem confusing, terms that haven't been heard before. So let's break down some of those for you, right? OCONUS, outside the continental United States, simple, OCONUS. So U.S. operations all U.S. Government operations are either defined by CONUS or OCONUS, is something in country or out of country. In CONUS, it also determines pay, it determines per diems, it can determine anything. If you are overseas anywhere that's outside of the continental United States, you're considered OCONUS. Now, typically it means outside the country. However, technically Hawaii, Alaska, and Guam would also be considered OCONUS, even though they are U.S. states and territory in the case of Guam. Puerto Rico would be another example, OCONUS, but it's still a U.S. territory. So, for example, there's Coast Guard operations, there's DEA operations that sometimes involve Puerto Rico, but those are outside, so it's outside the mainland, all right? Now, in OCONUS lore, when you're specifically referring to that, you go all the way back to the DOJ manual, and it refers to an operation of subterfuge that is conducted in order to get a fugitive to enter the United States or enter U.S. territory so that they can be easily apprehended by federal agents. The reason for this is simple, because the reason that having U.S. federal officials travel into another sovereign country's jurisdiction, travel to another sovereign country's borders, and conduct an arrest is very complicated. You have to work it out with their country, you have to go through all the investigation, and you have to share what might potentially be a sensitive investigation with other partners at that point, and that might not be something that you're willing to do because you don't want to compromise your investigation, you don't want to compromise what you're doing at that point. So, by using a lure, you get that person to come somewhere that is a U.S. territory where they then can be arrested. So it's a form of extradition in a sense. Someone's asking if Canada would be out of the country. Yes, Canada. I can confirm that Canada is a separate country from the United States, though you may not realize that if you're looking at the NAFTA negotiations. And Canada is currently realizing that they are not the same country as the United States, thanks to these NAFTA negotiations, and the fact that we're actually going to be imposing some tariffs on that. But that's a story for a different time. So, am I an FBI agent? No. In 2009, I passed all the tests to become an FBI agent, and I essentially decided to not pursue it. So 2009, at the age of, what would I have been? 24? Yeah, but no, I was 24, and I passed all the entrance exams, and I ultimately decided not to pursue it. I also, at one point, was considering becoming a Secret Service officer, and that was more recent. Passed all the tests for that, passed my polygraph, was considering going for it, but eventually I was offered a position with the Secret Service, but I eventually declined because I'll be real with you. I declined because I didn't think that I would be able to be in a position where I'd be near the President of the United States or other world leaders and be able to keep my mouth shut. It's really as simple as that. It's really as simple as that. I know that's part of your job there, and sorry, I couldn't do it. You know, I could be there in that level as an advisor. I could be in that level as an intelligence officer, but as security, Secret Service agent, nah, couldn't do it. Sorry. So I find myself here, right? Happy to advise the president or advise anyone on national security, but yeah, not able to. I don't think that Secret Service would have been my true calling. And even though it was very interesting, and I love our Secret Service agents, I would never treat them the way Jim Acosta treats them. Just didn't seem the right fit for me. I took a long, hard look at it. I got the offer, but at the end, just didn't seem like the right fit for me. So going back, lures. So a lure operation could involve extremely a lot of preparation. It can involve a lot of moving parts, phony identities, fake front companies could be set up, informants could be sent out, communications are had. We can send agents to other countries, not for arresting, but for meeting someone and getting them to come back to the United States, getting them to come for the purposes of arresting them once they come back onto U.S. soil. And arresting someone on U.S. soil means that we only have to use our own authorities and use our own jurisdiction. We don't have to get the approval of other countries in order to do that. And believe me, these types of OCONUS luring operations for the purposes of extradition are certainly something that can become very diplomatically fraught with contention and controversy, because other countries don't always like it because they see it as extrajudicial rather than following that normal process. Some people are mentioning rendition in the comments. That's a counterterrorism thing usually when the rendition program was still going on, and it had a lot more to do with getting other countries to roll up essentially terrorist suspects based on U.S. intelligence or U.S. derogatory information, DROG. So in this sense, that's one type of OCONUS lure that would have to be approved. That is a major operation, and it requires a lot of approval all the way to the Department of Justice level. So it is not something that is taken lightly, and it is not something that is able to be done without approval at the highest levels of the U.S. government. That being said, if that were used in a counterintelligence investigation, that would be illegal, because OCONUS lures are for extradition purposes. OCONUS lures are for the purposes of arrest in a criminal proceeding. They are not for counterintelligence. That counterintelligence has something else, and I'll talk about that in a second, but counterintelligence proceedings are looking into intelligence operations. That's when you think that you found an intelligence operation from a foreign service, and so you're running an operation to discover what those intelligence agents are and what their goals are. So if you are using an OCONUS lure on a U.S. person for the purposes of counterintelligence, that's illegal. It's against U.S. law. It's against U.S. Justice Department rules and regulations. Secondly, lure can also, at times, be shorthand. And it's shorthand for the Bureau for something they use in terms of their sting operation. So you guys remember Omar Mateen? Give me an example. Omar Mateen was the Pulse nightclub shooter. Now, at one point back in 2013, he had been approached by an FBI informant, and that FBI informant had gone to him and tried to talk him up into committing some act of terrorism in the U.S. When that took place, he was going to be brought up to do that attack. He was going to be working with the informant, and then at the very end, it was supposed to be a sting operation in which they would use all of the evidence they had collected through their informant on him and through other means as arresting him before he committed that fake, lured attack into that attack with criminal intent. So lures can also refer to entrapment-style sting operations that are used to stop potential suspects of counterterrorism. Then we see this a lot throughout the United States, where the FBI, and it's a very controversial measure, a very, very controversial measure, where they'll find some kid who's posting, say, ISIS memes on Facebook, posting stuff like Allah Akbar on Facebook, go to them, build them up as if they're actually meeting ISIS or actually meeting Al-Qaeda, have them go to meetings, potentially get them further along, and then just before they commit their final act, their fateful act as a terrorist, they're arrested by the FBI, and the FBI makes a really big deal out of it and says, oh, look at us, look how great we are, we've arrested this terrorist. But really, you created a terrorist and then you arrested him. You're not actually arresting someone or stopping people who are actually involved with ISIS operations or sleeper cells or people who have become self-radicalized. You are radicalizing someone to the point of direct action, to the point of kinetic action against the United States, and then arresting them. And so their argument is, well, we found somebody that, they always say, well, we found somebody that was willing to do it. And say, okay, yeah, they were willing to do it, but they were willing to do it because you put them up to it. So if you didn't put them up to it with your lure operation, would they have done it in the first place? That's the catch-22 there. Is this someone who would have gone on to commit it, like Omar Mateen in this case? And by the way, that is something that the IG is looking at. The use of these operations and the failure of the FBI to prevent things like Omar Mateen, things like the Parkland shooter, Nicholas Cruz, who had been known to FBI, things like Stephen Paddock, who of course was on all sorts of federal radars. Why were so many of these cases, why were balls dropped? Why were these individuals allowed to go through with their horrific attacks if they were known to FBI agents, if they were known to law enforcement in the first place? Now, third, let me explain a little bit about what it is what a real counterintelligence operation is. A real counterintelligence operation is called Offensive Counterintelligence Operation, OFCO. An offensive counterintelligence operation, OFCO, okay? OFCO. So go look up OFCO and you can dig into that. You can research more. I posted a little thread about it earlier today. And what OFCO is, it's very similar to an FBI lure, but it's done under the auspices of a CI investigation, because now it has to be an opened CI investigation. At that point, they are able to use clandestine methods, clandestine informants, clandestine collection methods in terms of signals intelligence, which would be essentially wiretaps or metadata collection. They are then able to use those informants or clandestine human sources to go in and meet with somebody, explain to them who they are falsely, give them false information, and essentially try to draw out a counterintelligence operation or a foreign intelligence operation that they believe is working against U.S. persons. Let me give you an example, because it will make so much more sense if I give it an example than I just go through the litany of it. There's two types of them. There's double agent operations, and there's tasked controlled source operations. So there's two types of OFCO. There's the double agent operations and control source operations. The difference being, are you using someone who is a source, or are you using someone who is already an actual CI officer? So I was never a CI officer. I was a regular intelligence officer. A CI officer would be somebody who is actually fully trained in counterintelligence. I was more of a human guy, but that if you're fully trained in counterintelligence and you're given that counterintelligence tab, then Marine Corps uses some really, really good ones. NCIS uses really good ones on Navy side. That's my side. They're able to do some amazing things. Army has really, really awesome counterintelligence officers as well. Didn't really work with the Air Force too much in terms of counterintelligence, but I hear good things. So And Bill Priestap, of course, that's a counterintelligence division director at the FBI. So that's why counterintelligence is so important, something that's so important as to what we're looking at today. And understanding these rules of the road and the way these things work is so important because we're peeling back the details. We actually just found major breaking story from Chuck Ross in Daily Caller that the symposium at Cambridge University, where Carter Page first met Stephen Halper, the spy, Carter Page wasn't the original Trump attendee who was invited. Carter Page was the second person. The first person they invited dropped out. The first person couldn't make it. Carter Page wasn't the original target. The original target was Stephen Miller. And Stephen Miller was the one who was supposed to go over and meet with Stephen Halper in the first place, not Carter Page. It was Stephen Miller who was originally targeted in all of this, not Carter Page. So just think about that. So Carter Page comes into the mix because Stephen Miller can't make the trip over to London to go to Cambridge University. Carter Page steps up and says, hey, I'm not doing anything. I'm just a volunteer. I'm just an unpaid worker, but I have started this title with the campaign. Why don't I go over to Cambridge, free trip to London, or at least free excuse to go to London, and I'll go represent the campaign there. Take Stephen Miller's place. So Carter Page wasn't even originally supposed to meet Stephen Halper. Carter Page wasn't supposed to be at the symposium. It was supposed to be Stephen Miller. And had Stephen Miller gone to that, you can imagine how history would have gone in a different direction. Now, would Stephen Miller then have been the one meeting with the informant? Would Stephen Miller be the one who would have eventually had the FISA warrant placed on him based on discussions with Stephen Halper, the spy? There's so many permutations of what might have happened. But at the same token, Stephen Miller might have looked at the whole thing and said, this is fishy, I don't like who you are, I don't like you talking about Hillary's emails, I don't want to talk to you, and he could have left. Now that's also entirely a different thing, and in that case, they would have had to cast the net wider and wider until they found more Trump associates who were willing to talk to them. So an off-co operation works like this, and this is kind of what I wanted to get to. Let's say, and I'm going to talk Navy terms because I know Navy. So let's say I'm in the Navy and we're doing operations in the Persian Gulf. Some people say you're supposed to call it the Arabian Gulf, but I still call it Persian Gulf. So we're doing operations in the Persian Gulf, and you pull into Bahrain, and you're in Bahrain where Fifth Fleet has got their headquarters, and you're there for resupply efforts. You're there in Bahrain for your ship's getting resupplied, you're getting refueled, you're stocking your foodstuffs, you're getting it all up in there. So you've got 5 days in Bahrain. Now the crew is going to get liberty. The crew is allowed out into Bahrain. They're allowed into the city of Manama, and they're allowed to get liberty, go hang out, go to the gold souk, go buy some stuff, go hang out, go do your thing, right? Within reason, of course. Navy sailors are always the best behaved when they're on liberty and at a port of call. We all know that. We all know that, of course, obviously. So you go out to the gold souk, whatever. Now let's say you go out there and you meet somebody and you get this report in, and me as the intel officer, I get this report in from Seaman Shmukatelli, and Seaman Shmukatelli comes up to me and says, Lieutenant Posobiec, I had this really weird meeting over at the Gold Souk, and I just really thought I would tell you about it because this merchant, he came up to me and he was asking a lot of questions about how many people were on our ship. They were asking about, did I have, they asked about other people's names who were on the ship. They acted like they knew what our mission was. They were asking me very detailed questions, and I felt really weird. And so Seaman Shmukatelli knows to come to me as the intelligence officer and report this to me because he thinks that it was a very suspicious conversation. Well, me now, operating in that mode, say, all right, that's potentially foreign intelligence. That merchant could possibly be a source for the Iranians. It could be a source for anybody, right? But most likely the Iranians, because the Revolutionary Guard operates very heavily in Bahrain. The Iranians work in so many different places. So we need to understand what exactly is going on with this merchant. Who is this guy? Is he working for somebody? Is he not working with somebody? So maybe I tell Seaman Schmuckatelli and I come up with a plan of action where I say, okay, Seaman Schmuckatelli, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back there and I want you to talk to this guy, talk to him some more, see if you can pull some stuff out of him, find out if he'll go out with you, find out if he wants you to go anywhere, find out if he wants you to talk to somebody, because maybe that person that he introduces you to is an Iranian intelligence officer or someone else who's higher up connected to Iranian intelligence. So this is how it works. You know, merchants, taxi drivers, people in bars, girls in bars, right? You know, all of them could potentially be sources for Iranian or other intelligence agencies. And as you can imagine, something like a Navy ship schedule, Navy operations, Navy missions is a huge goal. That's a huge goal of their information collection. They want to know what the U.S. Navy is up to. They want to know what specific ships are up to, what their missions are, what they're going to be doing. They want to know how to hide their operations from us. So their intelligence services are going to be out there trying to talk to our sailors, find out what we're doing, right? So they can then hide their operations. They can know and anticipate where we'll be when we'll be doing it. Okay. If you know about the USS Cole, the USS Cole was actually bombed, and one of the ways that Al Qaeda found, this is back in 2000 in Yemen, port of Amman, and one of the ways that they found the schedule for the USS Cole was through girls in Malta at one of the port of calls. Those girls that a couple of the sailors were with ended up being sources for Al Qaeda, and they gave the information about the schedule to Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda got the information to Yemen. That's how they were able to plan the bombing for the USS Cole. That information's out there if you go and look up that operation. A horrific pre-9/11 operation of Al Qaeda targeting U.S. military, killed U.S. sailors, almost sank one of our ships, the USS Cole. Happened under the Clinton administration. And so I tell Seaman Schmuckatelli, go back there, talk to this guy. And Seaman Schmuckatelli goes back and he says, oh yeah, you know what? I really wanted to buy some more stuff from you. And he strikes up a conversation. And now this merchant tells him, hey man, why don't you come out to this special restaurant that I know of, and we'll go to the back room there and I'll bring you to a special meeting. And all this time Seaman Schmuckatelli is going, he's now keeping a more heightened awareness about him, heightened situational awareness. So Seaman Schmuckatelli is going in there as my source, as my controlled source at this point, because he already has somewhat of a relationship established with that merchant at the souk because of that original interaction. And so they're going back to him, and as long as he's not, being overly dramatic or overly fishing for information from this guy, he's just kind of letting it play out, he can then go and meet people, potentially get names, potentially get descriptions, potentially get contact information that we can then all put into our report as, hey, this is potentially an Iranian foreign intelligence operation that we found through the use of our offensive counterintelligence operation, our OFCO operation. So this is it. It's cat and mouse games. It's back and forth. It's Tom and Jerry, right? It's I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, I'm looking at you as you look at me, and on it goes. And then I can hand that off to people in the more of the SIGINT realm, and they can then take, let's say I get phone numbers, let's say I get email, let's say I get any other type of like digital number or selector, I can then use that to the SIGINT folks, and they can put it in their database and kind of have their magic wand with it, and then we collect more information that way. This is how it's supposed to work in the real world. Now the double agent operation, that would be if I myself, as an intelligence officer, then went in and actually talked to the guy on my own instead of sending Seaman Schmuckatelli. But the reason I'm not going to do that is because they might know who I am. They might know that I'm an intelligence officer because they're keeping an eye on my ship. They might know already who I am based on having seen me in other places publicly, because when I was in the Navy, many of the times I was an overt. I was overt. I was never. I wasn't conducting operations personally in a covert or clandestine status. So you could, dig into my name through Navy records and find out that I was a Navy intelligence officer. So might not be the best idea, but at the same time, we might have somebody else who could use for that purpose. So this is the type of operation that we're looking at when we're talking about the FBI possibly using counterintelligence operations, counterintelligence assets against the Trump campaign and against Trump associates. We're now looking at OCONUS operations, so overseas operations, where these tactics may have been used against people like George Papadopoulos, against people like Carter Page. Potentially they were going after Stephen Miller. He declined his invitation. And so this is really the nitty-gritty. This is high level, very detailed stuff, and I can completely understand if if people are a little lost in the sauce as I'm breaking some of it down, because it is heady stuff and it is confusing stuff. But the point is that these are different types of operations. An OCONUS lure versus an OFCO operation. An OFCO operation is what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do when you're countering Foreign Intelligence Security Service, or FISS, under the auspices of ODNI, is you conduct OFCO, and the two types of OFCO operations that I just explained. You're not using OCONUS lures in a CI investigation. An OCONUS lure is when you're about to arrest someone. And if you look at the George Papadopoulos arrest, the way that he was in Germany, and then all of a sudden, he ends up in DC the very next day after a phone call, right after a lot of these text messages came out. It sounds like he may have been brought. It sounds like he may have been brought to the U.S. under false pretenses, where he was arrested immediately without even a warrant. Okay, that's, to me, sounds like an OCONUS lure, because remember, George Papadopoulos was in Germany at the time. He all of a sudden hops on a plane, flies back to Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., and is immediately arrested by the FBI. So what that sounds like to me, and this is a guy who had been in Europe for many months at this point. He didn't, obviously, as we know, have a job with the Trump administration. He only had his brief association with the campaign, or I can't even say job because he wasn't paid. So association with the campaign, that is, to me, highly suspect. The fact that this was done right after the text messages started to come out, right after these texts started to come out, the fact that they knew that they had used their asset against Papadopoulos, they had to shut him up. They had to prevent him from talking because they were worried that if Papadopoulos started talking about the asset that he was talking to, and Carter Page started talking about it, that they would realize that the same asset had approached multiple people. And if you have the same controlled source or human clandestine source or human confidential source, whatever they want to call the spy, he was a spy, Stephen Halper, then they would realize that they had been played, that had all been part of an operation. They would have realized it because they would say, wait a minute, you were talking to that guy, I was talking to that guy, I was also talking to that guy. So we know Clovis, Page, and Papadopoulos all talked to him. We now know Stephen Miller was also targeted by this operation at one point, by that invitation to Cambridge. And now what's really interesting, and I'll take this to the next level, what's really interesting about all this is the fact that most of this operation was conducted, and I've harped on this fact for a lot, and so I appreciate everybody who's been following me for the last year and a half as we've been talking about it. This all took place in London. This all took place overseas. So you're running a CI operation on U.S. persons, not in the continental United States. You're doing it overseas. And the FBI in this case was using a CIA asset in the name of Stephen Halper. So a lot of stuff is going on here that's not usually by the book. A lot of this stuff is being done. And this is, as someone who was an intelligence officer, this is why there are so many red flags going off, because this is not how this work is supposed to be done. Intelligence assets are not supposed to be run on U.S. persons in this way. It's perceived potentially as adversarial, or they wanted it to be off the books. We now know that Downer's information did not travel through intelligence official channels to the FBI. It was handed to the Obama State Department. It was handed to the Obama State Department by Alexander Downer through John Kerry. And that's how it eventually made its way to the FBI. John Brennan played a huge role in this as well as CIA director in opening this investigation. So there's a lot of really strange things that raise your red flag up and say that's not how this operation is supposed to work. Gina Haspel, of course, was the CIA station chief in London during the time when all of this took place. She was there from 2014 to 2017. So it was her 3-year tour there. Her second tour as CIA station chief in London, running the European division there. So Gina Haspel, of course, who was John Brennan's right-hand deputy. So this is what we have to keep going back at, folks. We have to keep going back at why were these operations run in ways that they're not supposed to? Why were these operations run in ways that in some cases are illegal? Go back to July of 2017. I wrote an article independently stating that Veselnitskaya had her translator that she had with her, who was who was working for the State Department and who had ties to the FBI. Well, got a guest coming up pretty soon here, so I have to wrap up my video. Hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on DMs. We've got a lot of stuff going on. We've got Bonnie and intern are back here. If you guys want to say hi real quick.
Hello.
You eating something?
Hello.
But we're doing a lot of work, and yeah, it does look like there is a potential political bias that had gone on here. A potential political bias because this was done during a political campaign, the most important political campaign in modern history. And if you notice, and this is the telling part of it, none of these tactics were used on the Clinton Foundation. None of these tactics were used on the DNC. None of these tactics were done in the investigation of Hillary's server, which we know, thanks to the ODNI IG Chuck McCullough, his testimony, his sworn testimony before Congress, that she had top secret SCI special access program information on her private email server. I don't know why a couple barroom meetings in London launched the most high-profile CI investigation in U.S. history, but someone who's got top secret SCI information on her email server, and she's not even questioned under oath. Sounds to me like a little thing called political bias. Jack Posobiec, One American News, former DIA 09 intelligence officer, signing off.